fact, from there actually has been right on target, according to most people I've spoken to.
And I mean,
Well, have you read his book?
That I can't say I have.
I believe he said we were supposed to be in famine by year 1980.
Right, but most of the world is in famine. I mean, we've actually, on a global scale, there are more people starving today than there was 20 years ago.
Well, there's more people. As a percentage-wise, the world has gotten richer and standard of livings have gone up. And there's actually a website that does a great job demonstrating that, because it goes and shows the per capita GDP of the countries, inflation adjusted. Almost all countries have gotten richer
well,
and are
certain
healthier.
parts of the country may have gotten richer, but people who use
Actually, that flies right in the face of Amnesty International.
most of the people are poorer and doing much worse off.
I don't think you'll find that.
They're not, because they're working in sweatshops, and when 20 years ago they were working on farms, but things like Monsanto have put them out of business. They can't farm anymore and live off the land. They're working in sweatshops. They're making sneakers, and they're earning pissant wages.
Actually, they're proportionally earning less now than when they were actually working on farms for the family.
I don't. Just a comment. I don't think we can solve every problem in the world. We're here talking about global warming. Can I ask a question?
Sure. That's what we're here.
I think there's one point being missed. I see over and over.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do a controlled experiment on the Earth.
Bingo.
You can't do a scale model because you don't have artificial gravity. You can't produce an artificial sun like engineers do. And since, according to Unstoppable Global Warming and many other sources I've read, the Earth's been going through these cycles long before there were any SUVs, and that raises a very profound point that the sole proof are models, which have no track record at all. And as a Jewish man, I get incensed when I see the word Holocaust denier and denier, something that's based on computer models that have, you can get any results you want. A model is just a spreadsheet that says what you think.
Now, I do have a lot of experience with multivariable modeling, and that's why what got me so fascinated is because I know tricks that you can play to make the story tell. But you hit it right on the head. If there was, because there's no empirical evidence for it, because if this was, if they had a good case, you would be running in every single classroom in the world a simple experiment. You would have a jar with 270 parts per million of CO2 and a jar with 380 parts per million of CO2. You'd shine an infrared light on it and you would measure temperature change on it. You don't see that done anywhere. Okay? Very easy way to prove this, right? If increase in CO2 goes higher, you should be able to replicate that in a laboratory, right? Show me, because I've looked very hard, okay? Show me anywhere where that experiment has been done to prove it. You can prove that CO2 absorbs infrared radiation, yes. But you can't show, at least they haven't, or if they have, I haven't found it, a simple experiment of increasing CO2 in a flask, shining a light on it, and measuring temperature change. It doesn't happen. Or if it does, they just seem to have overlooked doing it or publishing the results.
Well, a lot of this issue has been, you were talking about Big Brother is watching. The people who oppose the idea of global warming are incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful. You have Exxon Corporation, for God's sake. It's the biggest company in the world.
Well, I just showed a chart showing that ExxonMobil, because of all the threats, they stopped funding people to do research that would be contrary. So if they are that powerful, they certainly back down, and they're no longer funding research. And don't you have a problem with being able to even fund it? I mean, what's wrong with funding people like, by the way, I get a lot of hate mail. I do not for the oil companies, okay? I don't have a dog in this fight. I found this interesting. I created the presentation. I'm looking out for the well-being of the next generation. I don't want them to go through what I went through when I was a kid. I want to leave the world better for them. That's my only motivation.
Okay, well, then one of the things we should be working on is we should still be working on alternative fuels.
There's no argument there. No argument there.
Okay. But a lot of the thing about targeting Al Gore and sort of laughing about Al Gore is you sort of shoot down a lot of other stuff along with it.
I mean, Mikio Kaku, and I would, think it would be very hard pressed to find anyone who would think that he doesn't know his science is one of the strongest supporters of global warming.
I totally agree with you. Like I said, as you can read everywhere, there's a quote-unquote consensus out there. And I've just reviewed the science with you. Do you think you should be able to have a consensus when someone like me can get up here and raise these kind of questions? I took Dr. Thompson's own research, and I can ask simple questions and point out simple flaws. and he's one of the leading scientists in this field. And you just saw his data and his conclusion that he gave to the mechanical engineers at Ohio State. And if you can sit there and honestly say to yourself, you know, that's good science, then it's good science. I look at it and say that's a bunch of garbage. I'm saying that the conclusions they reach aren't supported by their own data.
You have evolutionists deniers, you know, saying evolution is just a theory.
I'm not denying. I'm just simply saying this is the data. Just what does the data tell you? I mean, like I said, I'm just doing this to trigger some interest. You go do your own research and believe what you want to believe. Will tell you though, if they start taxing gas by $2 or $3 a gallon and you're upset now, you're going to be really upset when you see the solutions to these things. Because every time I go to one of these events down at Ohio State, they always bring up population control. It scares me to death.
We have to do something about that.
And they talk about it freely, just like you're talking about here. Yeah. When you start talking about population control, and you look back what the governments have done historically, and you see China justifying infanticide on it, I wouldn't be pushing for that kind of an agenda.
Well, the problem is that science,
it scares me to death.
Science is not a kind thing. You know? I mean, science is a total son of a bitch, and and when you have
when there is too much population, Mother Nature controls it, and Mother Nature, in and of itself, will stop it. If you want to be worried about animals, be worried about the rat population in New York. There's going to be trouble here.
Well, yeah, we'll have famines, and millions of people will die. Why not use
We're going to start dying from the rats. There's more rats here than ever.
Well, that's because, rats are actually a foreign species. They were brought over with the first settlers. They're not native to the...
They were made by Mother Earth.
Well, no, but they came from another country.
But they came from Europe. They were never a North American.
They may have started here and then gone to Europe.
Well, no, they actually didn't have them.
Could I suggest that we move on to the next phase? I wanted to see if we could start to create some documents of freedom, because right now the Internet Skeptic is presenting information that's different than what we have been hearing in a lot of different more status quo. Even your traditional liberals status quo is the
status quo. Well, what makes
them
traditional liberals? He happens to be right. What he's doing is he's teaching you to think and not assume anything that's being fed to you is true.
Can you pick up what he's saying, John, or should we go around in a circle? Oh, excuse me. I just wanted to, Vivian, I'm just trying to create a protocol. My biggest concern is that there's freedom, that people, at least in this small room, or large room with a small number of people, at least are feeling relaxed and comfortable among each other, that we can express whatever is a deep concern to us. Because I think that's when I really feel bad. Even, Luke, when I saw you at the 9/11 Accountability Conference in Arizona, one of the presenters had given me some ideas that I had never heard at any 9/11 Truth meeting here in New York. And I found that in order to investigate this more, there was, for the sake of not dissenting from a momentum that was built up, or a group, because people were afraid to step out of that. And I thought, my God, if you're afraid to express a different viewpoint, it's a bad day for a free
Express
country.
what your heart wants you to say.
Excuse me?
You should express what your heart is telling you to say, and never be fearful of your heart.
Well, thank you. So with that tone in mind, can we sort of carry on, and Johnny will move the shotgun mic so we can pick up your questions?
In the past, I've looked at the books, and there's a new one out, Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, but they're not easy enough for the public to understand. I have 2 years of physics, and there's some things that went by, and I have to look at the CD. And so I wrote one scientist that I was impressed by, Sally Baliunas, a solar physicist.
Yes.
But she would write back intermittently. What I tried to convince her to do was write a simple book, had a name for it and everything, but she kind of lost interest. Is there a scientist that can write in an accessible way, maybe 8 to 10 key points? Because you need a simpler book, and then people can graduate to this material as in the appendices.
Do you think this is relatively simple?
No, I have 2 years of physics, and I
Still
think there are still a few things I have to think about. So
Because I've been trying to dumb it down as much. Now, when I do this, I float the ideas by some of the major skeptics out there. Like, has anyone seen the Great Global Warming Swindle? Yeah. Many of those scientists I correspond with to create this, and so we're trying to do that. It's trying to dumb things down into,
I think the average person
still too above.
A couple of years ago, I saw a newscaster say that Chicago, New York's crime was below Chicago's, like 1 murder left. And she'd have a famous idea that it's a city that's almost 3 times as big. She couldn't even understand the concept of unit. There's about 30% of the population is illiterate, so it has to be 3 levels down. That's an intermediate book for guys.
That's an intermediate, so I got to go down more. I'm glad you're making some great. I just came from this. I went to an event yesterday at Ohio State, and it was about what to do when the media calls. And they were giving a presentation. The media department of Ohio State was giving a presentation to talk to the professors to say, when the media calls you, this is how you deal with them. So they had all these media people here to tell you what they want, what they like. And the research communications director from Ohio State, they got up there and they were talking about the accuracy of the reports. And he pointed out that when you interview an Ohio State professor and quote him, they found that they're only quoted accurately, or the data is represented accurately 70% of the time. Okay? So literally, 70, I mean, that's a D average. Okay? When you're reading a reporter's report, according to the experts at Ohio State who track this stuff, they only you can tell them directly what you're trying to say, and they're going to accurately reproduce what you say 70% of the time. Yeah.
In the 70s, and the national security memos that Henry Kissinger wrote, he stated that population control is more important than a nuclear war with Russia. Also, Prince Philip also stated that if he died, he wishes to come back as a virus and to kill 95% of the population. And you see these elite talking about population control and eugenics. Do you think they're using global warming as a way to get that?
That's China's already doing it.
China's already doing it, but you see many elites, Rockefeller and Rothschild, supporting eugenics and population control movements.
All I can say, and this is why one of the things I try to make sure I mention in every single event, all I do is I encourage you to go to these events and listen to the discussion. When they talk about population control, it is well accepted, and they discuss it like, well, how are we going to do it? And that's what I'm sitting there thinking, I'm literally sitting there listening to this stuff, and I had to bite my tongue and I have to leave because I'm afraid I'm going to say something that's going to make sure I get never invited back. But it's just...
I'll say it for you.
No, it's like you're in Nazi Germany. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm looking around and going, this is
it started in the American Natural History Museum, the eugenics movement.
Yeah.
It was actually taken in California and mostly practiced. There were more people run through without due court process that were lobotomized and sterilized in California, so that when the puppet Hitler was picked up, he actually looked to this country, and California in particular, for models. And they also looked to the slaughterhouse, which is what Henry Ford was inspired by to start his industrialization of the automobile. We always think the assembly line started with the automobile. It started with the slaughterhouse. So the history is right here in this city. And my concern are non-lethal weapons. Non-lethal weapons means mind control. Convince a population of something so that it helps your agenda. And if people are discouraged, are depressed, they're ashamed or guilty that they're enjoying more resources than the other, and that there are too many others, and oh my golly, I'm the one that gets to be alive and the other one shouldn't be alive. That is going down the line of the eugenics movement, and the history has been denied to us because it's very embarrassing for a lot of institutions today. And a lot of I think it was the Jewish, it had Jewish in the name, that was supporting Hitler in this country. This is a big embarrassment. So, Well, so, sir, what was your name again? You told me in the email about being a Jewish man and the Holocaust. I didn't understand the email, and I still don't understand.
People who question global warming are compared to Holocaust deniers, when the evidence for global warming is solely based on worthless field models where you get any answer. I wasn't getting into you.
I think that, and I wonder that should the Holocaust not be denied, the source of how it came about should be profoundly studied and understood. And,
It's called white and bird. Look what they did with Darwin's theory. They ran around with it. They decided, oh, okay, here's proof, this is scientific proof, and now we're superior to you, and we're going to control you. And one question I have for everyone I talk to, you got the first world and third world. Where's the second world? And why are they the third world? Because they reject the banks and our industrial society that says, you do this or you're no good. The entire thing is insane.
what's the answer then? I don't know.
No, they weren't the second world. They were the communist world. When you sit with these people with the G8, there is no second world. And what makes these people poor? Because they tell the banks to eat it? You know? The banks are the worst things that happen. It's their way or the highway. They're not poor. They don't worship Sky God. They worship all the spirits that everyone used to worship before Sky God came and enslaved all of us.
Right, but in the modern day world, a lot of countries that are considered third world countries are that way because the IMF and the WTO actually run their economy. Actually, in fact, the United States actually runs economy of more than 1/3 of the economies worldwide.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying.
That's what makes them poor. It's not that they reject the American economy.
I want to say so. If you're uncomfortable, I'm really
No, that's okay.
I'm concerned for you because I know you're very good-hearted and you really want to help the world. And I wish I can tell you how much I sympathize. When I had money and I was giving money away to try to help things, I got to a certain point where I felt I wasn't helping things. And the reason I wasn't helping things was because I didn't understand the beast. I didn't understand what it was that I was trying to help. That's what I'm saying. When you're saying you're a Jewish man who resents being labeled as like a Holocaust denier simply because you're questioning global warming, that just makes me nervous. If anybody's not allowed to think in a certain way, and I certainly don't want you in this room to feel you voice your deepest, most heartfelt concerns. And I know Joe Friendly, just sort of out of a favor to me, has even opened himself up to this whole thing because he has so well covered all of the global warming conferences. And Mitchell Raven sent me an email totally scolding me for even having an event like this and said, you know, look at your good friend Joe Friendly, who has so admirably covered it. So I would want you too to be able to express most deeply what you're thinking while we have a chance with this Midwesterner, I guess you'd say you are?
Born and bred.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the guts to go up to Lonnie Thompson, and every time he gives a presentation, he invites all the people at the Bird Polar Studies. He says, double, triple check. The famous guys never show up, but they always send a grad student.
Actually, they send the education director.
Yeah, I mean, this guy here, I was annoyed because I didn't want him coming in for free. He was from the Sun, and he wanted to be in his press. So he showed me his cards. He had the cards. But when I went out and talked to him, his bigger concern is AIDS. And then that's something I'm going to take up with him later. But there are common themes. Now, I know somebody could have come here, saw there was 9/11 truth, got turned off, and decided not to come. So I think whatever your thing is, whether it's AIDS, or it's the codex on the food, or, you know, the global warming, I think it's important that you go to the argument to whatever level you need to go to that allows you to stay in community with the people you are living with, first in this local New York community, but ultimately in the entire world community.
I'll respond to that.
Great. Thanks, Joe. This is Truth for the Change. Truth for a Change. Everyone knows Joe's show, Truth for a Change? It's a daily show. More or less comes after Amy Goodman.
First of all, I have to admit I'm snowed. I couldn't quite keep up with all that. So basically, I have two questions. the amount of fossil fuel that humankind has used in the last 100 years, it seems to me so dramatic that we blew about 100 million years worth of accumulated fossil solar energy. Do you agree that that did something?
Well, we produce about 6 gigatons a year, and as that one chart shows you, it's pretty much a drop in the bucket. Also, that's why the global warming potential working at lifetime is so important. If you claim that man produces CO2 and it doesn't get pulled out, and you say it's going to stay there for 200 years, that's a huge problem. But the problem is the IPCC itself says their own estimates are between 5 and 200 years. And I showed data showing that it's much shorter. So while we may take that CO2 and put it out there, which by the way at one time was actually put down there. The other thing is, look at what goes on in a forest. All that new forest, those are carbon sinks. So we've produced a lot of carbon sinks in our forest. And so when you see a forest fire burn, when you see like 6 million acres of Yellowstone burn, that's a lot of CO2 being thrown up in the atmosphere. But if you look at those charts of CO2, you don't see spikes. It's a natural, gradual change. So Mother Nature absorbs, handles additional CO2 very easily. Otherwise, you'd see steps in the CO2 chart. You don't see that. You see a gradual increase.
About the forest idea, when they are making their statements about the growth of the forest, are they talking about the number of trees or the number of leaves?
Number of trees. And
are they small trees?
Well, that one chart that I show is Woodstock, and meaning the density. I have another chart that shows Bitterroot forest, and
so density is pretty good as an indicator, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the acreage doesn't matter anything. I mean, if you have one tree per acre, who cares? If you have 11 trees per acre, that's a big deal. The Bitterroot forest, and I have another chart in another presentation that shows that the Bitterroot forest is 11 times more dense. Okay, so that means essentially you burn 1 acre, you're really burning 11 acres. And each time you send a tree up into the atmosphere, that's a couple SUD. That's a huge amount of CO2 being thrown up there. So when you take a look at what man produces, it's a drop in the bucket. Especially when we've been preventing forest fires for over 100 years.
Now, what is the consensus about solar energy output as opposed to our receiving solar energy? You know, we measure how much solar energy we receive in minutes per day and stuff like that. So what is the consensus about the solar energy constancy?
We have that chart. It's almost, that was that chart I showed you and I said who would pick the correlation. We have the chart there that shows the
How do they measure that?
The sunspots. And now
that's the problem. Is sunspots the issue for the solar output? I didn't think that the sunspots are the key indicator of the solar output. And you say you think it is?
Well,
isn't it also nothing to do with
sunspots,
clouds from the
cosmic rays have to do with the cosmic rays have to do with the things. That's another. But that's once again comes from the sun.
Yes.
When they're creating these historical records, okay, they're going back and they're using a proxy one way or another. You can either use coral rings, tree rings, ice cores to get temperature, or sunspots from the sun. So when they look back, the only data they really have are different isotopes being collected in the atmosphere, or natural spores of it, or sunspots, and that's how they put it together. So there's isotopes and sunspots to measure the sun output.
Well, the problem I have with the core, ice cores, is that you're measuring on the surface of the Earth, and therefore you already have whatever phenomenon atmospheric could be interfering. There could be a cyclical variant to affect the core evidence, as opposed to, if you could, be out in space measuring the solar output directly.
Sure. That's a proxy. Also, like I said, think about the logic of using an ice core to measure temperature. Once you get above 32, the recorder turns off and actually starts erasing. There are no gaps in those ice core charts, and yet Elaine Thompson himself will show you areas of melting in his ice core, but there's no gaps. So he shows you periods of melting, but there's no gap, showing that once again there's a real problem with their data. Also, Vostok is on top of a lake. So you've got a warm lake underneath there that produces a lot of CO2, has natural organisms, and they find organisms throughout the ice core, which also disrupt CO2 and oxygen levels.
I just have one question. So basically you're saying that all the millions of tons of pollution that has existed since probably the 1900s on that from factories and cars and has no effect on global warming. That's basically your conclusion.
No.
That's it.
Let me clarify one thing. You're saying pollution, and I'm talking about CO2.
Well, I mean global warming. You're saying, well, all the tons of pollution that went into the atmosphere from man-made, machines have no effect on global warming.
Who's seen the dimming Earth? Man does impact, as a matter of fact, the dimming Earth shows that pollution actually cools the atmosphere. Particulate matter cools the Earth. They did a study on 9/11 of all things, that when they pulled all the jets out of the sky, and you had a clear sky, there was temperature anomalies, meaning that what man actually does helps cool it. Just recently, the UN pointed that out. The pollution actually helps, especially particulate matter. Just like the mountain, the volcanoes. No, it was not Krakatoa. It was. Oh shoot! A volcano once produced so much particulate matter that it produced a year without a summer, and you can get on the Google search a year without a summer. It's not Krakatoa.
I lived in LA, not saying how it came.
Yeah.
We had 1 day of sunshine in 90-something days.
Yeah.
So the pollution, all the man-made carbon dioxide, that monoxide has cooled the Earth.
Particulate matter, let me be real clear on this one. Particulate matter in contrails have been demonstrated to cool the Earth. CO2, which is a natural airborne fertilizer plant food, I would say is controlled by Mother Nature, not man. And because the bottom line is, it's all controlled by Henry's law and the absorption of the oceans. The oceans are like the hemoglobin of the Earth.
So without the pollution, the Earth would even be hotter, is what you're saying.
Without particulate matter, yeah.
How much hotter do you think would be without all?
No guess. I know the UN has done a study on that, and they've shown it. And there is a show that you can watch called The Dimming Earth, and it covers that kind of data. The main point I can point out there, I don't know what really in detail, is that particulate matter has been shown to cool the Earth, and that contrails have also been demonstrated to cool the Earth. CO2, from what I've shown here, is not a pollution. It's a organic compound. It's the foundation of life. 2, it has a very narrow IR spectrum. And 3, I would say, as the Arctic demonstrates, CO2 absorbs very little CO2. And the 5% that we produce is minuscule. So if there is any warming due to CO2, remember, we're only responsible for 5% of that.
So what happened after 9/11 when all the jets were grounded?
When they grounded the jets, it gave very clear skies because the clouds are very high altitude clouds.
Right.
And they reflect the light coming in from the atmosphere. They found that they got temperature anomalies on the positive side, meaning warmed during the periods where there were no jets in the sky.
So it was a warming period. We cut out the jets.
Cut the jets out for
Because
warming.
the jets, the contrails are keeping the...
Yes. Also, remember, you're given 2 options. Wouldn't you rather have global warming? An ice ages are pretty rough. Look at what happened during the Little Ice Age. People starved. Revolution occurred. The French Revolution occurred. Our Revolution occurred. People, all those famines in Europe. You're talking about, well, she left. You're talking about famines. Take a look at what happens during an ice age.
How can we look up the science? The solar radiation seems to be the key factor that
It's all over the internet. I would get a hold of a disc, just use one of the quotes that I have because those are actual quotes, and just do a Google search on it. The research name is listed on that one chart. They're Canadian researchers. Just do a Google search. It's all over the place. Yeah. Solar radiation temperature. Just do anything like that, and it'll pop up all over the place. The one chart I showed goes back to 1750, I believe. Well, that was ice core. That was ice core having to do with CO2 temperature. They don't measure the sun's output with ice cores. That's a good point, though, because I believe they can because a certain isotope is produced during high solar outputs. And I bet they could probably track that also if they want to. I don't know that research having been done, though. I do know they have it from sunspots and other areas.
On the
concern of the oceans rising.
Yeah.
I've been noticing that some studies are coming up stating that as we warm the ocean and get more water vapor and get more clouds and get more precipitation, some of this is going to fall over Antarctica, a landmass. And as a result, they in fact remove the water from the ocean and put it on land. The North Pole doesn't matter because it floats.
Sure.
But Antarctica it doesn't, so that in reality the oceans may not rise, they may fall.
Exactly.
Have you seen anything on that study?
Yes, I have heard that, and also what you're describing is a partial happens in the stage in general. It takes all the ocean and puts it on the ground, and that's exactly what would happen as you start heating the ocean around. I mean, that's how there's.
Yeah, it's not logical. I
Yeah.
was curious.
And it's, as the wind blows it across it, that's precipitation is going to come out.
May I just add one thing? You're assuming that it was ice. And this folk legend that was not always ice.
Well, actually, there in another presentation, I show that Antarctica was tropical, but that was back when it was at the location of like South America. It's because it's drifted out. The polar regions, I believe, have always been cold.
And that made it in Europe at one time with Siberia.
Yeah. I think they called it Gondwanaland or something. If you look at
And
it.
they had those birds that were running around.
Yeah.
They had global warming there without humans.
Well, they do, on a serious point, they do demonstrate that Antarctica has been a lot warmer than it has been today. Just recently they found mummified seals on the coast of Antarctica. And what that, it was a research up in Maine, and what that implies is that the seals only go on the shore to mate if there's no ice on there. And so by finding these mummified seals, they're making the argument that Antarctica has been a lot warmer, and it's been a lot warmer because the seals being on the shore.